So hi everybody, welcome back to Law Hero, and this is the second video in this series about constitutional law. And what I'm basically going to do today is just go through my tips. I have ebooks obviously on the subject, so I'll be flashing those up every so often. But today we're going to go through some tips around constitutional law for 2022. And I'm keeping all these videos to below 15 minutes, so I've got to cut to the chase. If you guys want some more information, go to my website, lawhero.eu. My email is info@lawhero.eu, and I'm also on Instagram at lawheroirl. So today we're talking about constitutional law, a subject which is quite abstract in its application because not every day is constitutional law litigated in the courts, but when it is, we all hear about it. I'll just give you kind of like my feeling about this examiner. I mean, this person hasn't asked about referenda. This person hasn't asked about the president or the AG. This person seems to be really militant around constitutional rights, specifically when it comes to, the liberty and freedom, under Article 40, but the other one as well is, the examiner seems to be quite annoyed at people's lack of understanding around a fair trial, for example, as well as that I've noticed this examiner is annoyed about the lack of understanding around Article 38.1, as I said, which is fair trial, and also, the kind of, I guess, understanding as a whole of the constitutional law framework. So, lots of people who study constitutional law get really bogged down and they can't remember case law and whatnot. I always say to people, just take the Constitution and highlight some of the articles. Don't worry. This is the very first thing I would do. If you want to study Irish constitutional law, get the Bunracht, our basic law, and sit down some evening, get your cup of tea if you're basic like me, and just highlight the parts that speak to you. Then what I would do is take a little notebook and write down Article 15, Article 38.1, and put it into your own words what that article means to you. I did that when I was studying the German law, the Grundgesetz, and it was a way for me to get high marks when I was in Germany. And I studied German constitutional law after I studied Irish constitutional law. So I am asking you to apply that logic to this exam, because if you don't know your constitution well enough, I don't see how you're going to pass this exam. You need to have a very good liaison between your constitutional document and then its application to the questions you're asked. That being said, though, the pass rates for constitutional law are very high at the moment, so don't be too worried. So the first one I'm going to look at is question 2, October 2021, which asks candidates to address the court's power to judicially review decisions of the Oireachtas regarding its members. So, as we know, under Article 15, there's a separation of power between the judiciary, the legislator, which is the Oireachtas, and the government. So this was a question around separation of powers between the legislator and the judiciary. Yet for some reason, as the examiner points out, that some of the answer focused exclusively on decisions which the courts review decisions of ministers acting in their executive capacity, thus not considering anything which could be regarded even on a generous reading as a decision of the Oireachtas, which means that some people don't understand the difference between the Raptor, which is the legislator, the judiciary, and the executive or government arm of the separation of powers. And this is very concerning to the examiner, because if you don't understand the separation of powers and why it exists as a means of checks and balances in a democratic society, how can you pass constitutional law? the basis of constitutional law is protecting the rights and freedoms of Irish citizens, but also ensuring a democratic state. So that's kind of a dual purpose to our constitution. And that's why I'm saying to you is go through the roughly the first half of the constitution, which is kind of around the administration of the state, and the second half, which is regards like personal rights and freedoms. So yeah, I would agree with him there. That is quite embarrassing. And as he said, there is no way you can justify using case law around ministers in a question around the legislator. And if you look at it here, like it says houses of Oireachtas and Oireachtas committees, if you missed out on that, it's fairly material. I always say in EU and in constitutional law not to do the case law question, because it is hard to score high marks in, and it's also very specific. It's much nicer to answer a question where there's a lot more issues involved, in my opinion. For example, one area I specifically leave out was asked in March 2021, which was question 5, around the European Convention on Human Rights. I leave it out because I personally don't think it's relevant, but of course you could have studied it. The problem is that those people who attempted that question didn't know enough about it. So, if you haven't done the work, you're not going to be able to answer the questions. It's as simple as that. But I would say don't just attempt a question if you have nothing to answer it with, because otherwise you're even going to look worse. And then I remember in March 2021, question 2 was this problem question around, an incident that happened in the 70s. In the meantime, some of the witnesses died, some of the evidence was destroyed, and it was kind of a question around, the case law and right to a fair trial. And you had to bear in mind that this was a criminal trial where the standard of proof is different. The burden of proof is different. It is beyond reasonable doubt. So you're almost inferring your knowledge of criminal law and the protections that come with that in your constitutional exam. And he actually mentioned that when he was speaking about it, because that would add to the importance of this being fair. And also, you would have to really have known the DPP v CC case, especially because in that, that is the Supreme Court authority for this kind of case where there has been a lapse of time, significant lapse of time, and that's the case where all the factors are which feed into that defense. The other point that the examiner mentioned is that the right to a fair trial in Article 38 wasn't well known by candidates. And this was the same complaint the examiner made in question 7, October 2021. So I think there's definitely a theme there. So on that basis, I would ask you all to concentrate on the right to a fair trial and what it actually means, and not to skip over it. You know it anyway from your criminal law study, but I'm just saying maybe have another look over it. So in conclusion, I would say that if I read through my constitutional law ebook, certainly chapter 4 and 5, President NAG referenda in Ireland, is very, very low on the conscience of the examiner. I would say that the separation of powers, constitutional rights, and personal liberty and fair procedure are the areas you have to know extremely well to pass the exam. If you do those well, you will have a grand old time. I would say as well that we're due a question around constitutional interpretation, specifically involving locus standi next time around. So I would have a look at that one for the next sitting. Other than that, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one.